Imagine, for a moment, you're turning the pages of a prophetic book, written nearly 2,000 years ago, when suddenly you encounter a vision so striking, so unexpected, that it completely shifts the way you see the world. A rider on a white horse with an imposing presence carries a bow, but no arrows. He wears a crown, but it's not one he was born to wear. And then he sets off on a conquest, not through violence, but through something far more powerful, an unseen force that influences from a distance. But what does this vision truly mean? Is this rider a symbol of Christ, bringing the victory of the gospel to the world? Or is this a false savior, a deceiver, the first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, destined to usher in a time of chaos and deception? What if I told you that this vision, written centuries ago, is more relevant today than ever before? That the world is preparing for a leader who fits the description of this mysterious figure, and that signs of his arrival might already be visible in our everyday lives. This is not just ancient history or distant prophecy. What if it's a warning, a call to spiritual vigilance, urging us to be alert, to look for the signs, and to prepare our hearts for what's coming? The time is now, and what you're about to hear may challenge everything you thought you knew about the end times. Stay with me as we unravel the identity of this enigmatic rider and uncover the startling mysteries hidden within the pages of the book of Revelation. What you'll discover might just be the wake-up call you've been waiting for. Are you ready to look beyond the surface and uncover the truth? Let's dive into this prophetic journey together. In the vast and mysterious pages of the book of Revelation, there exists a vision so profound, so captivating, that it has inspired centuries of theological debate, speculation, and reflection. Revelation 6 presents the unfolding of God's judgment upon the earth, where the seals of a sacred scroll are broken one by the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Each broken seal reveals a glimpse of the future, a glimpse of what is to come in the final days before the return of Christ. Among these visions, one stands out as particularly enigmatic, intriguing, and full of symbolism: the vision of the first rider, the rider on the white horse. Let us pause and reflect upon this singular image. A rider, mounted upon a pure white horse, a bow in hand, but curiously, no arrows. A crown rests upon his head, but this crown is not one that he was born to wear. It is one that has been given to him, conferred upon him. And then, with no further explanation, this rider sets forth to conquer. This image alone sparks a flurry of questions, both theological and practical. Who is this rider? What does this vision mean? And what does it tell us about the world we live in today? The vision begins in Revelation 6 verses 1-2, where John, the beloved disciple, describes what he sees as the Lamb, Christ, opens the first seal. As the seal breaks, John hears a voice like thunder, beckoning him, "Come and see." And then, before his eyes, appears a figure riding on a white horse. The rider holds a bow but no arrows, and he is given a crown. His purpose, we are told, is to go forth and conquer. To truly grasp the significance of this vision, we must first understand the rich symbolism embedded in this passage. The white horse itself is a symbol of purity, victory, and righteousness. In ancient times, a white horse was often associated with a king or a conqueror, someone who rode in triumph, someone who commanded authority and respect. The color white, traditionally linked with purity and holiness, is here an ironic contrast to the conquering nature of the rider. For what does it mean to have a symbol of purity, the white horse used by one who conquers? There is a deeper layer of meaning to this, which we will explore shortly. The bow in the rider's hand, however, raises even more questions. Why a bow, but no arrows? In the ancient world, a bow and arrows were instruments of war, used to strike fear into the hearts of enemies. But here, the bow is presented without the usual weapons of destruction. This is where we begin to see the first hints of mystery and paradox in the vision. Is this a warrior, or is this something else? The lack of arrows is significant. It suggests that the rider's power is not one of forceful, overt violence, but rather one of subtlety, persuasion, and perhaps even manipulation. To understand this more fully, we must turn to history. The period in which the book of Revelation was written, around the end of the 1st century AD, was one of political and military tension, particularly in the Roman Empire. One of the most feared and respected military powers at the time was the Parthian Empire, which had a formidable cavalry known for its deadly archers. The Parthian cavalry was renowned for their skill in archery, but even more so for their tactics. They were able to strike from a distance without the need for direct confrontation. A Parthian archer could shoot arrows while riding at full gallop, never even turning his body to face the enemy. This style of warfare was one of intimidation, psychological warfare, rather than outright battle. In many ways, the rider on the white horse seems to embody this same tactic. He does not conquer with force, but with influence, with an unseen power that operates from a distance. The bow, though lacking arrows, still represents the threat of power, a weapon poised to strike. It suggests that the rider's victories are not won by brute force, but by a subtle, almost invisible pressure, one that works upon the minds and hearts of those he seeks to conquer. This interpretation is a fascinating one because it suggests that the rider's power is psychological, rooted in persuasion and manipulation rather than traditional warfare. Now let us turn our attention to the crown that the rider receives. The text tells us that the rider is given a crown, but crucially, this crown is not inherent to him. The Greek word used here is stephanos, which is a crown awarded to someone as a sign of victory or achievement, most commonly given to athletes in the ancient Olympic Games or to generals who had triumphed in battle. This is not a crown of royalty, but a crown of recognition conferred upon someone by others. This detail is deeply significant. The rider on the white horse is not a king by birthright. His authority is given to him by others. This suggests that he is not a ruler in the traditional sense, one who inherits a throne by divine right or by bloodline, but rather one who rises to power through external recognition, through the will of the people or other forces. This crown, Stephanos, symbolizes a rise to prominence through public acclaim and approval, not through divine election or familial legacy. This further complicates the identity of the rider. Is he a ruler, or is he a leader who has been placed in power by the people? Is he a figure of righteousness, or is he someone who has managed to gain influence through deceit and manipulation? The crown he wears, though a symbol of victory, is not a divine or royal crown. It is a crown given by others, which raises questions about the legitimacy and source of his authority. The rider's role, we are told, is to go forth to conquer. But what does it mean to conquer in this context? The word conquer often evokes images of battles, sieges, and military might. But in the case of this rider, we are left to wonder, what kind of conquest is this? The absence of arrows, the lack of direct violence, and the psychological power he exerts all point to a type of conquest that is not physical but ideological. The rider's victories are not measured by land or territory gained, but by minds and hearts won over. His influence spreads not through armies or weapons, but through the subtler forces of persuasion, ideology, and perhaps even false promises. In this light, the first rider of the apocalypse could represent something far more dangerous than a physical conqueror. He could symbolize the rise of ideologies and systems of thought that sweep through the world, winning people over through promises of peace, unity, and salvation, but which ultimately lead to deception and destruction. His power is not the power of the sword, but the power of influence, an influence that is not always seen, but is felt deeply. The rider is a conqueror, but his conquest is not won through bloodshed. It is won through ideas, through manipulation, and through the subtle control of minds. This concept of conquest through persuasion is particularly relevant in our modern world, where political leaders, media moguls, and influential figures often rise to power not by military might, but through the control of public opinion. In today's world, we see the rise of leaders who sway the masses through promises of peace, prosperity, and security, much like the rider on the white horse, who goes forth to conquer with no visible weapon but his bow. This makes his role in the prophecy even more profound. He is a conqueror of ideas, a leader who wins not through force, but through the appeal to the desires and fears of the people. As we continue to study the vision of the first rider, it becomes increasingly clear that his conquest is not merely a distant future event. It is something that has been unfolding throughout history and continues to unfold today. The subtle rise of ideologies that promise peace, but ultimately lead to division. The increasing centralization of power in the hands of a few, the growing calls for global unity under a single leader or system, these are all manifestations of the very forces that the first rider represents. In the end, the first rider of the apocalypse is not simply a figure from ancient prophecy. He is a symbol of the forces that shape our world today. He is the rider who conquers not with sword and shield, but with ideas and influence. He is the rider who promises peace, but brings division. And he is the rider whose crown, though given by the people, is not a sign of true authority, but a symbol of a power that is ultimately empty and deceptive. As we look around the world today, we must ask ourselves, are we witnessing the beginning of this rider's conquest? Are we being swayed by the promises of peace and unity, only to find ourselves further divided and deceived? The first rider's vision is not just a warning for the distant future. It is a warning for the present. We must remain vigilant, discerning, and aware of the subtle forces at work in our world, and recognize that the greatest conquests may not be fought on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of individuals. The vision of the first rider is not a call to fear, but a call to awareness. The rider's crown, though given by others, reminds us that power, when not grounded in truth, can easily be manipulated. The absence of arrows reminds us that conquest does not always come with obvious signs of aggression. And the white horse, so often associated with purity, warns us that even the most righteous-seeming conquests can be tainted by deception. In the next part of our exploration, we will delve deeper into the interpretations of this rider, examining whether he represents Christ, the gospel's victory, or a false Messiah, a leader who promises peace but brings destruction. Stay with us as we continue to uncover the mysteries of this powerful vision. The vision of the first rider on the white horse, as described in Revelation 6, has been one of the most debated and mysterious aspects of biblical prophecy. As we saw in Part 1, this rider, armed only with a bow and a crown, is set forth not through the traditional methods of violent conquest, but by a more subtle, psychological form of victory. His appearance on the white horse raises many questions. Is he a symbol of Christ's triumph? Or is he a deceptive figure, a false savior, paving the way for the Antichrist? In this section, we will explore two primary interpretations of this rider, examining the perspectives that he may represent Christ or the Antichrist, and how these interpretations affect our understanding of the end times. One of the earliest and most widespread interpretations of the first rider on the white horse is that he represents Christ, or more specifically, the victory of the gospel as it spreads throughout the world. This view was championed by early church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons, who argued that the rider symbolizes the triumph of Christ and the spread of the Christian message. According to this perspective, the white horse represents purity and righteousness, and the crown signifies victory and authority given to Christ by God. In this interpretation, the bow without arrows is seen as a symbol of the spiritual conquest of the world, not through violence but through the persuasive power of the gospel. The rider's task is not to engage in physical combat, but to win the hearts of people through the truth of Christ's message. Just as Christ, during his earthly ministry, offered peace through love, grace, and truth, this rider goes forth to conquer the hearts and minds of humanity, bringing salvation and reconciliation through the gospel message. In support of this interpretation, proponents point to several passages in the Bible that seem to align with this view. For example, Revelation 19 verses 11 to 16 describes a rider on a white horse, but this time the rider is explicitly identified as Christ. The passage paints a picture of Christ returning in glory to judge the earth and establish his eternal kingdom. The white horse, in both visions, is a symbol of purity and victory, and while there are differences between the two riders, Revelation 6's rider carries a bow, while Christ in Revelation 19 carries a sword. Both are depicted as conquerors, coming to triumph over evil. The idea that the first rider represents the gospel's victory is also supported by the words of Jesus in Matthew 24 verse 14, where he states, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." This vision of a white horse rider could, in this context, represent the unstoppable spread of the gospel message, a victory that is achieved not by violence or force, but by the powerful proclamation of truth. However, There is a compelling counter-argument to this interpretation, one that calls into question whether this first rider is truly a divine figure or something far more sinister. In stark contrast to the view that the first rider represents Christ, another powerful interpretation suggests that the rider on the white horse is not a figure of purity and righteousness, but the Antichrist, a deceptive figure who appears to offer peace and salvation, but ultimately leads the world into chaos and destruction. This view holds that the rider's crown and bow are signs of his false authority and deceptive tactics, and that his mission is not to spread the gospel, but to create a false unity under the guise of peace, which ultimately deceives and destroys. This interpretation has gained significant traction among theologians, particularly those who focus on eschatology, the study of the end times. The key to this interpretation lies in the rider's characteristics, which bear striking similarities to the descriptions of the Antichrist found in various prophetic passages throughout the Bible. In Daniel 8 verse 25, we read about a ruler who will cause deceit to prosper, and who will destroy many without warning. This figure uses deception and manipulation to achieve his goals, much like the rider on the white horse, who conquers not through war, but through persuasion and psychological influence. In Matthew 24 verse 24, Jesus warns of false Christs and false prophets, who will deceive many, even performing signs and wonders to lead people astray. The first rider, as a conqueror who wins hearts and minds, could easily fit the description of a false Christ, a counterfeit Messiah who claims to offer peace but ultimately leads to destruction. The rider's crown, which is given to him rather than inherent, further suggests that his authority is not divinely ordained, but artificially granted, possibly through public acclaim or manipulation. One of the most compelling aspects of this interpretation is the rider's role in bringing false peace. In Daniel 9 verse 27, the prophet speaks of a ruler who will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will break the covenant, bringing desolation. This passage is often understood to refer to the Antichrist, who will come as a peacemaker, creating a false sense of security and unity, only to break the peace and bring about conflict, suffering, and devastation. The first rider on the white horse, with his promise of conquest without war, could be seen as the initial stage of this process, a leader who comes in the name of peace, but whose true goal is control and destruction. The contrast between the first rider and Christ is striking. While Christ is depicted as a warrior who returns with a sword, a symbol of judgment and authority, Revelation 19 verse 15, the first rider's bow without arrows suggests a conquest of the mind, not of the body. He does not fight in the traditional sense, but instead works through manipulation, spreading false ideologies and bringing people under his influence. His victory is not one of righteousness, but one of deception, a deceit so powerful that it can deceive even the elect, as Jesus warned in Matthew 24 verse 24. The question of whether the first rider represents Christ or the Antichrist is not merely a theological debate. It has profound implications for how we understand the events of the end times and how we prepare for what is to come. If the first rider represents Christ and the victory of the gospel, then we can take comfort in the idea that the spread of the gospel is a powerful force that will ultimately triumph over evil. The victory of Christ will be achieved not through force or violence, but through the transformative power of truth and love. The white horse, in this interpretation, is a symbol of the purity and righteousness of Christ's kingdom, which will triumph over all darkness. However, if the first rider represents the Antichrist, then we must be more vigilant. We are warned that the end times will not be marked by overt conflict or clear-cut battles, but by subtle deception and manipulation. The first rider, like the Antichrist, will come as a figure of peace, but his true agenda will be to deceive and control. He will conquer not through armies or weapons, but through ideas, ideologies, and psychological manipulation. His crown, though given by the people, is a crown of false authority, an authority that is not rooted in truth but in deception. As we look at the world today, it is difficult to ignore the signs of these forces at work. Across the globe, we see the rise of ideologies that promise peace and unity, yet often lead to division and conflict. We see leaders who promise salvation but ultimately deliver oppression. We see the blending of religions, ideologies, and worldviews that seek to create a false unity, a unity that is not grounded in truth, but in compromise. The first rider's conquest is not one of external warfare, but an internal conquest, a conquest of the soul, the mind, and the heart. In this light, the interpretation of the first rider as the Antichrist is not just a theological argument. It is a warning for us to remain vigilant and discerning. We must not be deceived by appearances or false promises of peace. The rider's bow without arrows teaches us that the most dangerous forms of conquest are often those that come without violence, without bloodshed. The rider's crown, given by the people, reminds us that false authority can be granted by the masses, even when it is not legitimate or righteous. As we venture into the third part of our exploration of the first rider of the apocalypse, we must not only focus on the ancient prophecy, but also consider the undeniable relevance it holds for our modern world. The rise of global ideologies, the search for a unifying leader, the tensions in the Middle East, and the spiritual movements gaining momentum in contemporary society all point to an undeniable truth. The vision of the first rider on the white horse is not just a prophetic symbol of the past, but a warning for the present and the future. To understand the full weight of this prophecy, we must connect the dots between the ancient vision and the current global context. We are living in a time where the signs are becoming more evident, and it's impossible to ignore the way they align with the biblical prophecies outlined in Revelation. The first rider's appearance is not a distant event, but an ongoing process, one that is already unfolding before our eyes. So, what does this mean for us today? How are the prophecies coming to life, and what can we expect in the near future? The most striking development in recent years, as we witness the unfolding of global politics, is the increasing calls for a global unifier, a leader who can bring together the fragmented, divided nations of the world into one cohesive unit. In the past few decades, political leaders, international organizations, and global think tanks have all advocated for more global cooperation, transcending national borders, religious divides, and ideological barriers. The rhetoric surrounding the need for global leadership has intensified, with phrases like a world without borders, one global government, and a new world order becoming more frequent in public discourse. Leaders from every corner of the globe are calling for international unity, stressing the need for a strong, unified leadership to combat global challenges such as climate change, economic inequality, and global health crises. What we are witnessing today is nothing short of a prophetic echo of the first rider's mission. This rider, whose crown is not inherently his, but given by the people, reminds us of the rising figure of a leader who may appear to come as a savior. This leader would not rise through the traditional means of power or divine appointment, but through the will and desire of the masses, who long for a figure capable of uniting the world's fragmented pieces. The rider's crown is a clear indicator that his authority is granted, not inherently possessed. This can be interpreted as a symbol of the way such a leader might come into power, not through divine selection, but through the desires and aspirations of the people, the very ones who seek peace and unity. Consider the growing trend of global summits and the increasing influence of global organizations like the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and other international bodies. These organizations advocate for collaboration on a scale never before seen in history. The recent global health crisis, climate change negotiations, and ongoing economic challenges have underscored the urgency for coordinated international action. The world is crying out for someone who can bridge the gaps between nations, ideologies, and belief systems. This search for a leader capable of global unification mirrors the rider's appearance, as he sets out to conquer not with weapons, but with the subtle influence of diplomacy, ideology, and global cooperation. However, there is a crucial warning in this global push for unity. The first rider does not conquer through force alone. He is a conqueror of ideas. The world's desire for a unifying figure could very well lead to the rise of a leader who promises peace, prosperity, and unity, only to deliver division and control. We are witnessing the groundwork being laid for such a leader's eventual rise. As history has shown, those who promise peace often bring chaos, and those who promise unity sometimes end up sowing the seeds of destruction. This search for a global leader is not just a modern political trend. It aligns eerily with the rise of the first rider. One of the most notable regions where we can see the prophetic implications of the rider's conquest is the Middle East. The ongoing conflicts in this region, particularly between Israel and its neighbors, have created a vacuum that cries out for resolution. Nations across the world have attempted to mediate peace agreements, but each attempt has been met with limited success. The Middle East remains a hotbed of tension, violence, and political instability. And yet, as we look at this situation, we see something that could very well fit the prophecy of the first rider. The rider on the white horse, armed with a bow but no arrows, is a conqueror of peace. A false peace, built on fragile agreements and diplomatic promises that ultimately crumble. Throughout history, we have seen leaders who sought to broker peace, only to have their agreements broken or their promises unmet. The peace offered by these leaders is not a lasting peace, but a superficial one that provides temporary relief but does not address the deeper, underlying causes of conflict. The first rider's absence of arrows symbolizes this very concept, a peace that appears to conquer, but which ultimately fails to bring lasting resolution. In the Middle East, we see the growing importance of peace agreements, particularly involving Israel, Palestine, and other Arab nations. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, marked a historic step toward normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab countries. While these agreements were hailed as a breakthrough in diplomacy, many skeptics argue that the underlying issues, such as the status of Jerusalem, the rights of Palestinians, and the broader geopolitical tensions, remain unresolved. The peace brokered in these agreements, much like the peace promised by the rider, is not a peace that brings true reconciliation, but one that temporarily masks the deeper divisions. The prophetic vision of the rider on the white horse seems to anticipate this very scenario. A leader who comes in the name of peace, but whose true agenda is much more insidious. This leader will promise a resolution to the world's greatest conflicts, but his peace will be a false one that provides only a temporary reprieve before the ultimate devastation. As the tensions in the Middle East continue to rise, the question becomes, are we witnessing the stage being set for the appearance of such a figure? The rider's quest for conquest, devoid of arrows, is a chilling metaphor for the type of diplomacy that we see today. A diplomacy that often fails to address the root causes of conflict and leaves lasting damage in its wake. Perhaps the most troubling sign in the world today is the growing spiritual movement that emphasizes universalism, tolerance, and inclusivity, qualities that are, on the surface, admirable, but can be dangerously deceptive. We are living in an era of post-truth, where feelings, opinions, and personal beliefs often outweigh objective facts. This age of relativism has led to a blending of religious beliefs, with many people advocating for a spirituality that is not grounded in the truth of Christ, but in a vague sense of oneness with the universe. While there is nothing inherently wrong with seeking unity and understanding, the danger arises when people begin to ignore or reject the truth of Christ in favor of a more palatable, non-confrontational spirituality. The rider on the white horse, with his promise of peace and conquest through influence rather than violence, mirrors the rise of this false spirituality. This is the very spirit of the Antichrist, a leader who will come in the name of peace and love but will ultimately lead people astray. The rider's crown, given to him by the people, symbolizes the way in which such a figure will be elevated by public acclaim, not divine appointment. In this post-truth world, many are susceptible to following a leader who promises unity, peace, and acceptance, but whose message ultimately denies the exclusive truth of Christ. The rise of a global spirituality that rejects the need for repentance, sin, and the return of Christ aligns with the prophecy of a false Messiah. This figure will claim to be the answer to humanity's deepest needs, but in doing so, he will create a religion that centers on human achievement rather than divine salvation. This is precisely the deception that the first rider embodies, a conquering figure who presents himself as a savior, but is, in fact, a harbinger of judgment and destruction. As we come to the end of our exploration of the first rider on the white horse, one thing becomes clear. The vision presented in Revelation 6 is not just a mysterious prophecy from the distant past, but a compelling warning for us today. The world around us is changing at a rapid pace, and the forces at work are shaping a future that might mirror the very events foretold in the Bible. From the rising calls for global unity, to the false peace brokered in the Middle East, to the growing spiritual movements that reject the truth of Christ, the signs of the times are becoming more and more apparent. The rider on the white horse represents a powerful force, a leader who conquers not through traditional violence, but through influence, persuasion, and the promise of peace. This figure may not be fully revealed yet, but the stage is being set, and the world is unknowingly preparing for a leader who will offer unity and salvation, but ultimately lead many astray. Whether this rider is Christ bringing the victory of the gospel, or the Antichrist preparing the way for deception, we must be vigilant and discerning. We cannot afford to be passive as the events of prophecy unfold before our eyes. Now, more than ever, we must stay rooted in the truth, stand firm in our faith, and keep our eyes open to the signs of the times. So, as we reflect on these prophecies and how they intersect with our world today, I urge you to take action. Remember that the first rider's conquest may not be fought with weapons or armies, but through the subtle forces of influence and manipulation. And in these times, it is crucial to stay awake, alert, and spiritually prepared. The truth is out there, and it is our responsibility to seek it, understand it, and live by it. If this video has spoken to you, and if you feel that you are being called to stay vigilant and aware of the signs of the end times, then I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, God's Advice. We are here to bring you not just insight and knowledge, but also the guidance you need to navigate these times with wisdom and faith. Don't forget to like and share this video with your friends and family. The message we've discussed today is too important to keep to ourselves. It's a message that can awaken others to the truth and help prepare them for the days to come. By sharing this video, you're not just sharing knowledge. You're helping to spread a crucial message of spiritual readiness and divine truth. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos that dive deep into the prophecies of the Bible and how they impact our world today. Stay connected with God's advice. And remember, this is just the beginning of our journey together. Let's stay alert, stay grounded in the truth, and continue to seek God's guidance as we navigate these uncertain times. Thank you for watching, and may God's wisdom guide you as you prepare for the coming of His kingdom.